Hi, Amberlynn Reid is once again in hot water, and I wish I could say that this is the worst thing she's ever done, but unfortunately, I really don't think it is. Our girl does have a terrible track record of doing all kinds of awful things to different people, and this one, if it is true, is definitely up there with some of the worst stuff that she's done, so we're going to get into that a little bit in this video. Amber recently did a live stream where she kind of addressed the accusations that she had stolen her ex-partner Beck's inheritance. That live stream contained all kinds of interesting things, and I'm going to cover some of them in different videos, but in this one, we're going to talk about Beck and the inheritance and all of that stuff. We're going to quickly recap what Beck has actually accused Amber of. We're going to address how credible of a source Beck is when it comes to this topic. We're going to go over the recent explanation that Amber gave in her live stream, and I am going to argue that with everything we've heard so far and all the evidence that's been shown, it's very, very likely, in my opinion, that Amber does owe Beck $6,000. It's my opinion, and I'll tell you how I got here in this video, that Amberlynn Reid needs to bank transfer Beck $6,000 right now, and Amberlynn Reid can forget about the crappy edited screenshots that she's been showing on her live streams. Evidence of that bank transfer is the only receipt that I'm interested in seeing from her at the moment. She's more than welcome to post those receipts on her community page, and I think that that is what she needs to do. I know that's a relatively bold claim, so I am going to explain why I think that, so we'll start from the beginning. In Beck's recent video from the 25th of February 2025 called Part 2 Mr. Snowflake Q&A, Beck kinda reacts. Beck initially makes this accusation that Amber coerced them into sending this money to a private account which was owned by Amber. Beck then claims that they never saw this money again. So, in this video here, Beck brought everyone's attention to the fact that they claim Amberlynn Reid stole $6,000 from them. It's not quite as simple as claiming that Amber stole the money, it was more so that this money was placed into the bank for Beck, and Amberlynn manipulated and coerced them into sending the money to a private account held by Amber. This came up because during the Q&A, somebody asks Beck if they've ever been financially abused by Amber. I will explain this further in a second, but just to be clear here, this money was inherited by Beck when their mum died from a settlement which was part of Beck's father's job. So, when Beck is asked if Amberlynn ever abused them financially, they say this.
Amber constantly held over my head that she was the only one with an income. During almost every argument, she would tell me how she pays all the bills and buys all the food, as if that gave her a right to control me, and as if I contributed nothing to her life. I would tell her each time that if she felt that way, I'd gladly go back to working. She'd quickly say, no, I don't want you to do that. And she didn't. She couldn't handle being apart from me for any extended period of time.
I'm just going to add here that this is completely true. There are lots of videos of Amberlynn Reid moping around the house whenever Beck left her alone. A great video showing this is this one here from Salty Crab, which is called A Look at What Happened When Beck Would Leave. In this video, we see Amber being depressed as hell and moping when she's being left alone. This video shows that it was very true that Amber did not like being left alone by Beck. But we don't just have to look at the evidence on Amber's channel for this. We know this is true. Amber admitted it in the live stream that she just did.
I'm not perfect. Beck wasn't perfect. I was super controlling of their time, of their energy. I always wanted them near me. Always. It was crazy.
It's kind of taken for granted in girl world that we know that Amber used to treat Beck really, really badly. There are years and years of videos documenting this. It's really clear that Amber was emotionally abusive and financially abusive. She used her money to control Beck. You don't have to just take my word on this. You can go back on Amber's channel, even as far back as when Amber was interacting with Libby. There are clips where Amber is talking about how she's paid for so many things for Libby. Amber absolutely uses money to control people. We know this is true. Amber admits this as well. There's a part in this live stream where she goes on to explain how she uses money to control people and buy love and buy affection. I mention this because I think it's really important to lay a kind of groundwork for the sort of abuse that Beck was facing while they were dating Amber. And I just want to make that really clear. So that's the environment that Beck was in when they were with Amber, when they received this inheritance money. Beck goes on to say this.
She would also be sure to take away any money I'd get from other sources. I mentioned this before, but even being seen collecting change would trigger her to question whether I was saving up to leave her. When my mother passed away, me and my siblings received a portion of a settlement from my dad's job that ended up being around $5,000 to $6,000 for each of us. I was not allowed to keep it. She told me that the money had to go into paying the bills and my half of the rent. My mom had plans for when she would have received that money before she passed away. Getting it was bittersweet, and I would have liked to use it in some way to honor her. She wouldn't have wanted Amber to have it, and it really hurt, but she took it anyway. When I told her that I would like to do something with the money, she dismissed it and treated me like I owed it to her and it wasn't my choice. She said that I couldn't have it because the bills needed to be paid, even though I knew that she was making enough from YouTube to cover bills and rent with no problem.
So there it is. That's the accusation. You can hear it there in Beck's words. Beck expands on this in a pinned comment, and that is because what we've just just heard Beck say, although they do explain where the money came from and where it went, it's not super explicit the exact details of how this happened. So Beck pins this comment. I'll put it here. I'll read a couple of little highlights from it, but you can pause to read if you want to read the whole thing. So Beck says, I saw some confusion in the comments about how she ended up with the money and how she kept it from me. Amber basically didn't just take the check or anything. We had a joint bank account that the settlement was deposited in. She told me to send it to her. So that suggests that there's this joint bank account which Amber and Beck both have access to. And then Amber suggested that this money be sent from the joint bank account to a private bank account which was owned by Amber. This whole who has which bank account thing will become relevant later in the video. Beck says she told me to send it to her for things that she paid for, the bills, the food, the rent, etc. And at first I said no. We thought about it and eventually I caved. That's really important. Those words there, we thought about it and eventually I caved. That is like exactly how somebody would describe being abused financially. The person who does the abusing just thinks, well, we had a conversation and they decided to see things my way. They changed their mind. So what they did is their fault because they chose to agree with me. But that is a line right out of the narcissist playbook. As we know, if you see my previous video, which was about taking accountability and how to apologize, I used some clips from Dr. Romani, who's a really interesting psychologist who talks about narcissism. But this is interesting because Amber, in my opinion, although I'm not a doctor, I think she is a narcissist. So it makes perfect sense that Amber would think, well, Beck agreed to give me this money, so I've done nothing wrong. I didn't steal money from them. They agreed. But what the narcissist often doesn't see and often isn't willing to admit is the coercion which takes place to make the person agree. We are going to go through all the different possibilities of how this money came in and what happened, and I'll give you all my thoughts about all of that stuff. But I just want to make it clear here that that line there, I caved because she made me feel like I owed it to her, is exactly accurate to the kind of person that we've seen Amber be in the past. Beck then writes, I transferred this money to her and I never saw any of it again. That's the basic overview of what Beck is accusing Amber of. Now, as soon as this all came out, Amberlynn's comments were absolutely full to the brim of people saying things like this. I cannot verbalise how evil it is to take your caretaker's inheritance. We won't forget about you taking Beck's inheritance. Have anything to say about taking Beck's inheritance? You really are the worst. Give Beck's inheritance back. Here faster than you stealing Beck's 5,000 inheritance money. Take accountability. Talk about taking Beck's inheritance. Don't ignore it. Be an adult by talking about it. Give Beck's inheritance back. Hopefully your instincts encourage you to return Beck's inheritance. Cut that check. You should give Beck's inheritance back. Thanks, girly pop. I'm sorry if you feel like I stole your inheritance. I promise there are hundreds more comments where those ones came from. And of course, Amber did not address it. She didn't reply to any of these comments. She kept uploading outdated old vlogs, which were quite irrelevant because they were about other things, and she did not mention this inheritance. Amber did finally cover this in her private live stream. I haven't watched that one, obviously, because I'm not a member. I'm not giving her any money, but I'm pretty sure she rehashes everything that she said in that live stream in this live stream. So before we get into Amber's attempt to respond to this, I quickly just want to cover something. So the thing we need to cover here, which is really, really important, is how credible are Beck's claims. I have covered this a touch in another video, but I think that what I said there is still true now. I think that probably Beck is telling the truth. I've said this before, but there are parts in previous Q&As where Beck is asked various questions and they ignore ones that are particularly rude or that cause them to overshare about Amber. So that made me believe Beck. But I also said in another comment under one of my videos, it is also just the vibes. I know that vibes are not an exact science, but I don't really know what else to say about that. I just have this feeling that Beck is probably telling the truth. However, I'm aware that really the reason that I believe Beck so much is because they didn't answer this question about Amber smelling, right? So Beck is asked in a Q&A, did Amber smell? And Beck completely ignores it. But in a later Q&A, Beck is asked again about Amber's smell, and in that one they do address it. Here's what Beck says in this second Q&A about Amber smelling. They cover it twice.
Amber did say that she was concerned for her mobility and that she wanted to be more mobile, but never did anything about it while with me. I think that was because her online presence was more important than improving her quality of life, just like with her health. She wasn't concerned about how that lack of mobility affected me either, and how much work and effort I had to put into help her due to those things deteriorating. As for her hygiene, she really never brought up concern about it. She would douse herself in perfume sometimes to help any issues, but that's all. I won't go into detail about smells or anything too personal, but her hygiene did affect everyone around her, myself, and others' personal belongings, and she did not show concern for any of those things.
Later in the same video, Beck then says this.
I would talk to Amber about her hygiene. I tried to convince her to cut her hair to make maintenance easier on both of us, and she refused. I told her to stop wearing the chokers when the dark spots appeared behind her neck, and she told me it wasn't a big deal and that it was fine. I'm not going to go into detail about the smell, but it was brought up to me a lot by everyone around me, and I did have to talk to her about it. Her reaction was usually to blame her depression and how she struggled to clean by herself. Eventually, I stopped asking her to help herself because it wasn't going to happen. It did get a little better when we moved into the apartment with the large walk-in shower, but I did still stand in the bathroom and help until the day we broke up.
So in these two clips I've just played, I want to mention a couple of things. So the first one is that Beck does seem to be talking about the smell a lot more than they initially did. When they first came back, they didn't even acknowledge the question about Amber smelling, right? But later they do get into that. Now, there are people who might think that this is something that Beck shouldn't cover at all. But the reason I disagree with this is because the fact that Amber smelled related to the fact that Amber had bad hygiene, and Amber having bad hygiene related directly to Beck's experience of abuse, because Beck was expected to take care of Amber. So the fact that Amber smelled or had issues with personal hygiene are kind of part of Beck's own story, because they are the one who spent time there looking after Amber and trying to avoid the smell. So when we say, well, why is Beck talking about Amber's smell? Well, the reason for that is because it's part of their story. I do absolutely respect Beck's right to share their story, and I support them in doing that, but we can't lie and hide from the elephant in the room, which is that talking and sharing secret things about Amber is making Beck money. Hell, it's making me money. So while I do believe what Beck says, and I do think they're being factual, I can understand how somebody might look at what Beck is doing and think that they're lying, purely because the more that they share, the more views, etc., that they'll get and the more money that they'll make. I don't think that this is the case. I'm just saying it is interesting that initially when Beck started, they wouldn't talk about the smell, but then as they realised how much money there was to be made, they then started talking about the smell. I've been consuming Girl World as like my dirty little secret for years and years and years, and I'd never once made a video about it. The first video I ever made about Amberlynn Reid has made me over £5,000. That video has over 600,000 views, and I'm being candid about this because I think it's important to realise how much money there is out there. None of Beck's videos have got that many views, but if you add up 6 videos which all have 70k, we're talking about $2,000 to $3,000 to $4,000 to $5,000. I know the pound is stronger than the dollar, so it might be slightly different, but the point is there is money to be made, real money, life-changing money, house deposit money. So we can't ignore that. We can't act like there isn't this other ulterior motive, and I feel like this money motive does not get talked about. However, I've gone on a tangent. We're going to put that there for a moment. I hope no one's mad at me for sharing how much money I made from that video, but I think it's interesting and it's super, super relevant, and it might help you to look at reaction channels slightly differently as well. So I just want to mention that we do need to factor this in when we look at Beck. Beck needs to make this content talking about Amberlynn. The more they share, the more views they get and the more money they make. And I do think that Beck is dancing around that line of like, I have this I could share and it would get me a lot of views, but do I want to share that? And I know there's all kinds of things Beck could say, right? Beck could go into like physical detail about various different smells and all that stuff. Beck could say all kinds of things. We probably can't even imagine the things that Beck could say about Amber. And the point is, and I stand on this point, that although Beck has said some revealing things, there are lots of things that Beck could say that they haven't said. So I think that we need to kind of consider, I don't know if I'm fully honest what my opinion is on this, so I haven't like fully landed on it. All I know is that I'm inclined to believe Beck and think that they're credible, but I just want to mention that the money of it all is a relevant factor. We can't hide from that. Having said that, I'm inclined to believe Beck. I think that they're credible. Even though they do stand to gain a lot from mentioning Amber, I'm still inclined to believe the things that they say. Or put it this way, I'm significantly more inclined to believe Beck than I am to believe Amber. Amber has a proven track record of years and years and years of lying. Even in the live stream that we're talking about in this video, Amber outs herself for lying about having more than one phone. So when you compare these two characters, Beck and Amber, which one are you going to believe? The answer is not Amber, is it? But of course, it's extremely important to say as well, nothing is black and white. Nobody is perfect. I don't believe that there is a good person and a bad person, or a completely blameless, pure, innocent victim and an awful, evil perpetrator. That's not how I look at the world anyway. But in this situation, when it comes to this specific thing, talking about the inheritance and who owes who money, I believe that Beck is telling the truth. The reason that I've said all of this is because I'm trying to show that the community don't just blindly believe and adore anyone who exposes Amber. We have brains. We have the ability to think critically, and for various reasons it seems to be a pretty common opinion that Beck is credible. Just the way they speak, the things that they choose to say and not say, the fact that they aren't sensational in the way that they cover the story. So because of all of this, I'm inclined to believe a big portion, if not all, of what Beck says. The reason this matters will become relevant now, because of course we need to know, is Beck lying about the inheritance? If it's true that Amber stole or coerced this money out of Beck, that is really, really bad, and I for one want to know if it's true. With that all being said, Amber did some serious cardio with that spade because she dug her hole even deeper than it already was in this live stream. During this live stream, somebody asks Amber the question, do you owe Beck $6,000?
Do you owe Beck $6,000? No. So I guess we can talk about the inheritance. I did talk about this in my members only, but obviously not everyone saw that. So in my members only, I talked about how Beck is saying that I took the inheritance. Me and Beck had a joint account.
So here Amber says no. She says that the reason this is not the case is because she and Beck shared a joint account. Now Amber is going to go on a huge weird tangent and try to discredit Beck and explain that she in fact did not take this money from them. You'll need to listen closely because Amber is going to use every single tool in the narcissistic toolbox to try and get this past us. But we are not going to let her. So Amber says that she and Beck had a joint account and that is why she doesn't owe Beck $6,000. Listen to this first part here and just remember when we watch this, the thing that we need Amber to answer is whether she owes Beck this money or not.
In my members only, I talked about how Beck is saying that I took the inheritance. Me and Beck had a joint account. Okay, so this is where a screenshot comes in, so I'm glad we're talking about this. Me and Beck had a joint account, and it was originally her bank account. Their bank account. I'm sorry, I'm getting really, really flustered. My apologies. So it was originally their bank account, and when we got together, I ended up going on their bank account together. So we were joint bank accounts. So any money that either of us both received went into one full-fledged one area.
To be clear and to be really specific here, Beck never said that they didn't have a joint account with Amber. Beck implied that there was an additional private account owned by Amber which this money was transferred into. I do not believe that Amberlynn Reid, as controlling and as manipulative as she is, does not have her own private bank account. I just don't believe it. Plus there are clips where we've seen Amber passing her bank card to Beck. If that card was for the joint account, why would Amber need to give it to Beck? Beck could have used their own card. Amber, instead of answering the question, do you owe Beck $6,000, with an answer which relates to that money, where it went, how it was spent, claiming that Beck is lying about the fact that Amber took it. Instead of any of that, Amber goes on this massive rant to try and discredit Beck and make them look like a liar, even though Amber said that that's not what she wanted to do in this live stream. She does this first by talking about how she was the one who couldn't access the bank.
I was not able to get into the bank ever. I have so many screenshots of wondering, how much did I get paid? I would text Becky and literally ask that. I'd be like, how much did I get paid, etc., etc. And Beck would literally send me screenshots of our bank. So I have everything crossed off that's like personal information, but this is just proof that that was a lie from Beck, an absolute lie. I said, how much money is in the bank? And here's a screenshot that says, hi, Rebecca, like, etc., etc., showing how much money we had in the bank, because I was not able to get into it. I was never able to see how much went in there, how much I got paid, unless I looked on my AdSense, which is part of YouTube, and that's how you get paid. I was never able to see any of that. And we had our own separate debit cards that were in the joint account together. Any money that Beck received would go into the same spot that my money went to, because again, it was joint. I didn't have private anything. This is probably the one of the biggest lies, has left my jaw on the floor.
Amber then goes on to show this screenshot, and Amber is trying to say that because she can prove that at one point she asked Beck how much money was in the bank account, that proves that Beck is lying about Amber stealing the inheritance. That just makes no sense. While this screenshot does show that they did have a joint account, Beck never disputed this. Beck was saying there was another separate account that they couldn't access, which is the one that the money got moved to by Beck after they were coerced by Amber. Amber doing this, trying to discredit Beck in this way, is literally just her trying to clutch at any possible straws that she can to try and find any lie or any possible accusation that she can level back at Beck to make herself look better. Beck admits that there was a joint account. They say that from this joint account the money was then moved to another account of Amber's. I know I'm like banging on about this point, but I feel like the logistics are really important because Amber will try to wriggle out of things using semantics, so we need to be really specific about what we say to make sure we know that we're right. So if it's true that this money was put into the joint account and then it was transferred out to another account owned by Amber, which is what Beck claims, then this money is absolutely owed back to Beck, right? The money was given to Beck, it belonged to Beck, it should be Beck who gets to spend it. If they were convinced or coerced to give it to Amber for something else, then I think it's highly likely that that was Amber being manipulative with Beck's money, in which case she owes the money back to Beck. But imagine I'm wrong, imagine that Amber is not lying and this money did get transferred into this joint account and it stayed there. That's where things get a little bit muddy. I've never done the joint bank account thing, I like having control of my own money, but I know that joint bank accounts do work for a lot of couples. But the key thing to make this work is communication. You need to know what money is being spent on what. So depending on how much money was in that current account, it becomes kind of hazy. Just to be clear, I think Amber needs to send this money back to Beck, but let's just spitball on this idea for a second. I think it's kind of messy, this whole joint account thing. So if you've got a bunch of money in a joint account, say there's like £5,000 in there, and then I get given a specific £500, say like, I don't know, my mum gives me £500 for my birthday, and it's sat in that joint account, 5,500. If I then go out for dinner with the person who I have the joint account with, and dinner is £200, if I then say to my partner, this £200 is coming out of the 500 which was given to me by my mum, then cool. But if I don't specify that and nobody talks about it and we just put it on the joint account and we don't say, it becomes really hard to know which money was spent on that. Does that make sense? So unless Amber and Beck had really clear communication, like this 6,000 which is sat in this joint account is not going to be touched or is going to be touched, that's what we kind of don't know. The agreement and communication that happens within the couple is the most important thing, and we have no way of knowing what happened there. Of course, this is just me playing devil's advocate because it's very likely that this money was transferred out and so this isn't relevant. I know that was a bit wordy and complicated, but I just think it's really important to discuss like how this physically works. Beck is saying that Amber told them that this money was needed for rent and bills and such. This is a huge issue in and of itself because Amber convinced Beck to quit their job so that they could care for Amber, and with that agreement came the fact that Amber would be covering the bills. Amber basically said to Beck, you don't need to work, I earn enough to cover both of us. So that kind of begs the question, when Beck received this money, why did Amber even make out that the money was needed by her? She was earning thousands on YouTube, which is what Beck says. I think it's just that Amber didn't like the idea that Beck would have access to this resource. Beck having access to this amount of money would have meant that they could have left Amber at any moment, and I think Amber was really uncomfortable with that. That is how financial abuse works. They keep resources from you so that you can't leave if you want to. The point is that even if Beck did agree that this money could be used for other things, this was agreed under duress, and I think that that is very wrong. In her live stream, Amber admits that she attempts to buy love. This is really important because it's almost like a coin. One side of it might be, I'm using this money to try and buy your love and buy your affection. What Amber doesn't seem to realise is that it's very unlikely that you would do that, but not do the other side of the coin, which is use money to manipulate and control people. With Amber herself admitting that she uses money in this way, it makes me even more inclined to believe what Beck has said. Even if this money was spent on bills or rent or whatever, it seems like it happened outside of the agreement that Amber and Beck had. In my opinion, that is a form of coercion, so I totally believe that Amber needs to write Beck a check. Also, just to cover all bases, we know that the way that joint accounts work is there's a certain amount of money in there, say there's like, I don't know, 15 grand in there. If Beck gets sent this, by the way, I say 15 grand because I know Amber was earning a lot of money. Say they have this joint account with 15,000 in there, and then this 6 grand gets sent in for Beck. There's then, what, 21,000 in the bank. When Beck and Amber broke up, Beck was entitled to take their 6 grand out of that total amount. But it sounds like that conversation didn't happen. This is where what Amberlynn Reid doesn't say is almost just as important as what she does say. Imagine in this live stream, Amberlynn Reid was asked the question, do you owe Beck $6,000? Imagine that the answer to that was no, because Amber and Beck had this agreement that the money would be used for something else, like rent or bills. Amber could have said, no, I don't owe that money to Beck. Beck agreed that that money could be used for XYZ thing. That would be a relatively understandable defense from Amber. But Amber doesn't say that. Instead, she drifts into this huge tangent where she attempts to discredit Beck and make it look like they're lying, which, by the way, is what she does for the entire live stream. The point I'm making is that Amber doesn't answer the question. She slides off on this tangent, but she never actually explains where the money went. The fact that the two of them had a joint account and that Amber sometimes couldn't access the online banking has no relevance and no merit on whether Amber stole this money or not. What's interesting to me then becomes this: when they broke up, if the money wasn't transferred out to Amber as Beck claims, and in fact it's sat in the joint account along with all of Amber's YouTube earnings, which would be a significant amount of money, then it wouldn't be clear whether that 6,000 had been spent or not. If the total money in the bank stayed above 6,000, then we have no way of really knowing whether it was Beck's money that was spent or not. You see what I'm saying? It's kind of like semantics. When you pour all the money into a pot, as long as the pot stays over 6,000, unless the two people agree, it's not really clear whether the 6,000 that's left is Beck's or whether that was spent. You don't really know unless the two discuss it. In that instance, when that happened, if the two broke up, Amber would need to take 6,000 out of that bank account and give it to Beck. What I'm trying to say is that whatever way you look at it, whatever semantics you put on it, whether the money stayed in a joint account or it was transferred out to Amber, either way, Beck needs to be given that $6,000. The only other thing Amber adds, which I think is worth covering, is this.
But never once have I ever been financially abusive. We have been equally so bad with money. That's why I have nothing to literally show for anything, because we would spend so much money, the both of us, constant Like, they were allowed to buy what they want when they wanted. Like,
Amber is saying here that she and Beck are both bad with money. She insinuates that she has nothing to show for the years and years of money she's been earning on YouTube. This is a joke in itself. Can you imagine earning thousands and thousands of dollars on YouTube and having absolutely nothing to show for it, apart from a drawer full of stickers and croc charms? Crazy. Anyway, the point is, the closest Amber gets to explaining where this money went is by saying that she and Beck were both bad with money and that they both spent a lot of money. But that doesn't actually answer the question, does it? After the clip I just showed, Amber goes on to explain how she buys love. She even mentions how she bought Beck a car.
I literally bought them a car. Like, I bought them a car. I'm that type of person where you guys have even seen it. You guys have seen it. You guys have called me out on my shit. I buy love. And I have gotten so much better with that, especially because like the last like 6 years of my life, 7 years of my life, 8 years actually. What am I saying? Like the last like 8 years of my life, like I have bought people with money. I have bought love, I have bought friendships, I have bought laughter, I have bought time with people because of money. And that's how it's always been. I have never been a greedy person when it comes to money. It's almost like I got a kick out of giving people money and like going on shopping sprees and like doing all these sorts of things. So it's like, what? I don't know. Speechless.
Mentioning this is an absolute joke, just as the top comment shows. You bought Beck a car because she drove you everywhere, girl, you can't be serious. Amber did that to benefit herself. But also, this is what you learn in How to Become a Narcissist 101. One of the ways that money is used to manipulate people is through buying them things. It's not always about where you don't let money be spent, it's also about where you do let it be spent. And the fact that Amber brings up that she bought Beck a car, which by the way was completely for her own benefit, it's so toxic and messed up. The whole live stream is full of this horrendous bullshit, but let's not let ourselves get manipulated. Did you see it? Did you see what happened there? Amber doesn't answer the fucking question. She's asked, do you owe Beck $6,000? And she never answers it. She never explains where the money went.
So that's awkward. So that's what I had crossed off on that one.
Yep, she did not answer it. She didn't explain what the money got spent on. Instead, she claims that Beck is a liar and tries to manipulate the narrative. She doesn't address the actual accusation. Based on what we've covered in this video and everything I've seen so far from Amber and from Beck, taking into account who is likely to be the most credible and who is the most likely to be lying, I think that Amber needs to bank transfer Beck $6,000 right now. Evidence of that bank transfer is the only kind of evidence that I want to see from Amber. Because if Beck is telling the truth, Amber is a horrendous person, taking money that somebody was given because their mum passed away, that they had intended to use to honour their mum in some kind of special way for them, is absolutely fucking wrong. It's wrong if you do it overtly, but it's also wrong if you do it subtly. I'm talking to you, Amber. It's wrong even if you do it with a, well, we need to pay the bills, don't we? Well, you know, you haven't really paid rent in a while, so maybe it could go to that. You had an agreement where Beck was taking care of you and you were paying the bills. Just because Beck came into some money because of an awful event in their life does not mean that suddenly that agreement is revoked and suddenly they need to spend money on bills and rent which you had initially said you would pay for. And as I've discussed in this video, even if the money didn't get sent to a separate account and it stayed in that joint account, Beck was still entitled to take $6,000 from that pot when they left. I'd be very interested to hear what you guys think. Do you think I'm right? Do you think I'm wrong? Do you believe that the money was transferred out to a separate bank account that Amber has that she's claiming she doesn't have? If the money did stay sat in that joint account, do you think Beck was entitled to it when they left? Please by all means leave your thoughts in the comments and I'll see you guys soon. Bye. Okay, you guys, hi. This is like an extra little bit just for my loyal people who want to hear me yap. So the main thing I need to say is my previous video, which was about Millie Bobby Brown, I am going to cover all of your comments and all of your thoughts in an upcoming video where I respond to all of your comments on a bunch of my videos. So I'm just gonna, I am going to cover that, and I'm sorry to anybody who like I offended or let down, and I have since moved my opinion on massively and I have quite a lot to say about that video, so I'm going to cover that in another video, so please don't feel that I'm ignoring it. I appreciate all of your comments about my take and how you don't agree with me. You guys were really kind and what you said really made sense to me, so suffice to say my opinion has changed, but we'll cover that in another video. I didn't want to leave that like unaddressed, but we're going to move on now. So this is what I'm going to talk to you guys about quickly. This is Quicksilver. I said that I would talk to you guys about this book when I finished it, so I'm like, here I am, I finished it. I read it on my Kindle rather than reading the physical book, so now this is like in mint it unread, untouched condition as like a little trophy, and I know what happens in it, but I haven't had to like touch the actual book, which is really funny. I'm usually not like that with things, but it's just like so pretty. I like that it's stayed mint. I also like reading in the bath, so I don't want to take like nice books into the bath. Anyway, I'll actually keep holding it so that you can see what I'm talking about if you skipped this section. So this book, I absolutely loved it. It really like scratched the what I call the shadow daddy itch. So when you finish ACOTAR and you just can't wait to get Azrael's story and you want to hear about all the fucking shadows and all that stuff, this definitely scratched that itch. Once again, like there's loads of stuff wrong with it. There's actually a typo in here, and the book is by no means perfect. There are loads of problems with it. The writing is kind of repetitive, but I found it really funny. I loved how the characters were actually funny. The writing is written how somebody would actually speak, and although that's not always the best, in this situation I really liked it, and I found it so thrilling. Like from the moment when it starts, you're like, when is she going to meet the guy? Because you know it's just an excuse for the writer to write porn, but she meets a bunch of guys before she meets Kingfisher, and you're like, is this the guy? Is this the guy? And the whole time it's really clever. I like the way they set up the world. I like the Quicksilver traveling through the pool. I really enjoyed the ending. I listen, I've read stuff that's good as well. Like this is not high literature. This is not like good writing at all. And like I'm looking at all my books, like I do read some stuff that isn't just like TikTok smut, but I can't lie, like I really enjoyed this. So if you're thinking of reading it, by all means read it. Just to be clear, not everything I read is TikTok smut, but I do recommend this one. It's really quite good. And putting that down, let me show you some crochet. Here is today's crochet. This is a star that I'm currently working on. It's actually, well, it's technically finished, but with crochet it's never really finished because all you have to do is loop on wool and carry on. So it's like finished kind of, but this is my this is the star. I also have other colours of star. I will show you some other colours in other videos. I'm working on a purple one at the moment. I got the pattern from Betty McKnit, so I'll link her video in the description. This is the 7-day star. It's 2 rows of shells, a row of single crochet, and then 2 rows of double crochet, and then a row of single and 2 rows of shells. It's really pretty. I'll put some like better quality clips in here if I can. I love crocheting blankets because I love just going like back and forth with the same stitch, but sometimes I get bored of like one single row of all the same thing, so I like crocheting these because you get a mixture of different stitches. I appreciate you guys watching. You are all the absolute best, and I will see you really soon.